University in Kirksville, Missouri, and a proud member of the Missouri Association for Museums and Archives Board, currently serving as Vice President. And today we have a great conversation with Dr. Stephen Hoffman and Dr. Lara Kelland with us from the University of Missouri St. Louis and Southeast Missouri State University, the Museum Studies program specifically. And I do know as well that we have a number of other museum program directors too. So I'd actually like to go around and just have a few introductions. So Dr. Hoffman, if you could just give a brief introduction to yourself, and then we'll follow that up with Dr. Kelland. And then Dr. Sara Orel from Truman State University, if you would also be willing to just do a very brief introduction of yourself, please.
Okay, sure. I'm Stephen Hoffman, and I am coordinator of the Historic Preservation Program at Southeast Missouri State University. We are housed in a Department of History and Anthropology. We have four kind of areas that we focus on: historic preservation, preservation of the built environment, and then museum studies, archives, and historic site administration. We have an undergraduate degree in historic preservation, and then we have a master's in public history with an emphasis in historic preservation, and then we're just debuting a track in digital heritage.
Thank you.
All right. Yeah, I'm Lara Kelland. I am the Director of Museum Studies, Heritage and Public History is the name of the program at University of Missouri St. Louis. I'm a little new, still a little new, I'm claiming, to the program. I came in last fall. I left a position, I was Director of the program in Public History at the University of Louisville. So I'm still getting my Missouri feet wet, but I spent my whole life in the Midwest, so it feels like a very good match, a logical match. We have an MA in Museum Studies, Heritage, and Public History, and we also have a graduate certificate as well. My strengths really are oral history, civic engagement, and digital history. And there are a couple other faculty that are in the program that I'll speak a little bit more about their strengths as we go along.
Great, thanks.
My turn?
Yes, Dr. Orel.
I am Sara Orel, and I teach art history at Truman State University, and I'm the founder of the Museum Studies program here. We have a very interdisciplinary museum studies program, and we have students from sciences and history and anthropology, and we've got a business track in it as well. So I don't have a background in museum studies. I've learned very much on the fly, and we work very, very closely with Amanda in special collections. In fact, most of the exhibits that we've done have been through special collections. It's very much a hands-on kind of program.
All right. Well, thank you. I'm sure we may do some more introductions as time goes on, but the focus of today's session is actually on these three programs, and generally speaking, the programs, the formal programs of study in the state of Missouri. So we're giving the opportunity for these three individuals just to give an overview of their programs, and then open it up for some discussion and some questions on the educational needs of students who are interested in going into museums or being employed at museums, and what we might be able to do to facilitate that education, either awareness or program development. So it's great to have everybody here and have a meeting of the great minds. And so I'm wondering, Dr. Hoffman, if you could go ahead and start talking about your program a little bit. What kind of things do you guys offer? What types of experiences do your students get in the program? Maybe where they get employed, or where they tend to go after studying at CMO.
Okay, sure, thank you. So I'll start kind of with the undergraduate program, and really the way our programs work is that the master's program is really kind of built on top of the undergraduate program, and that a lot of the public history courses would be dual enrollment kinds of courses. So as I mentioned in the introduction, we have four areas: the historic preservation, kind of as we commonly think of it in terms of preservation of the built environment, architectural history, those kinds of sort of the big artifacts in the landscape. We are certified by the National Council for Preservation Education. And so preservation is kind of our core, and all of our students take courses in built environment preservation. And so we have, an introductory course, kind of a research methods course in sort of working in archives for analyzing primary source documents and those kinds of things that would be useful for any kind of documentation or interpretation. And then we have an architectural history class, which teaches the various styles of American architecture and the character defining features of those various styles. And then the capstone of the core is a course we call Legal and Economic Principles of Historic Preservation, a really long, clunky titles for our classes. And that really focuses on sort of the preservation world as we know it today. I think probably many of us in the field are familiar with the National Historic Preservation Act, which was passed in 1966 and has been amended periodically since then. Kind of lays out a framework where every state has a state historic preservation office, and every federal project has to investigate what its effect is on the historic resources in an area. Anyway, so this class really kind of looks at that law and all the elements and just kind of the basic structure of the field. We have experiential learning kind of woven throughout our courses. So in the Legal and Economic Principles class, that's where students prepare draft National Register of Historic Places nominations. They do historic resource survey for the local Historic Preservation Commission and those kinds of things, because I think we all know in our field that it's fine and good, you read a book about something, but really what you need to do is to get your hands engaged in it and actually do it. So we have that woven into our courses. So that's the HP core that everybody does. And then we have what we call the public history breadth requirements. And so those are those other areas that I mentioned: museum studies, archives, and historic site administration. And so I teach the built environment courses. And then we have 3 other faculty members: an archivist, Dr. Lily Santoro, who does the archives, Dr. Joel Rhodes, he does historic site administration, and Dr. Eric Clements does our museum studies classes. So our students have to take 2 of those 3 areas in terms of a kind of a theory class. They are doing some hands-on work in those theory classes, but basically that's kind of the intro to that area. And then we have a course that's a practicum that rotates among those 3 faculty members. And so when the museum studies person does it, he works with the local, the Cape River Heritage Museum, and the students working with the board develop, design, and install the museum exhibit. When the archives problems class is running, students are working with an organization in the community and processing a collection. The historic sites, they work with a local historic site on, I don't know, interpretive plan, or I think the last time he taught it, they did sort of a traveling trunk exhibit kind of thing. So the idea is that you sort of have the capstone in that public history breadth that is completely immersive and hands-on. We do allow for electives, and so we have courses on historic building materials. We have a course on downtown revitalization. We have a course on collections management that Lily Santoro does, and that's where they're working with a local the Cape River Heritage Museum, in fact, and working with their collections and rehousing artifacts and those kinds of things. And then our site administration person has a living history, which is sort of the costumed interpretation course. So we have those electives. We do have a required internship that at the undergraduate level is a pretty substantial requirement. It is 400 hours. Well, it's 9 credit hours, so it's kind of 3 courses. Most of our courses are 3 credit hour courses. So 9 credit hours, 400 hours, basically 10 weeks, 40 hours a week. Most students do it either the summer between their junior and senior year, or they do it, they finish all their coursework, they pretend to graduate in May, do their internship over the summer, actually graduate in August. We have some other requirements in the program for some interdisciplinary courses that relate to developing skills that, we all need skills that aren't going to be taught in a Department of History and Anthropology. And so we require a couple of courses there and some sort of additional historical perspective for interpretation and documentation purposes. So that's kind of the undergraduate program in a nutshell. The graduate program sort of layers on top of that. So a number of those courses are dual enrollment, so they have both graduate and undergraduate students in them. The graduate option, students can either do a thesis, or my recommendation is always to substitute those thesis hours for doing an internship and what we call an advanced project. So they have 2 smaller professional experiences. In part, I tell them, if you can write 3 25-page papers and you're trying to convince somebody you can write a 100-page paper, they're probably going to believe you. Whereas if you've written a 100-page paper and you're trying to convince somebody, you'd be a great hire to run their museum, that's more of a stretch. And so, so we do try to emphasize that hands-on experience. We do, in the Master's in Public History, we have 2 tracks. So one is the historic preservation track that would align with the core that I mentioned before. And then we've struggled with another track. We had heritage education, and we've just had turnover sort of on the education side of things. And we just developed a digital heritage track that gives students the opportunity to become conversant in both sort of the public history core elements, but then also be exposed to some aspects of sort of the digital delivery of that. And so they can either take courses in computer science, or they can take courses in out of our educational technology arena. Or I'm trying to think, I think there's some like GIS, courses and things like that. So our departmental faculty member she's a medievalist, but she also is very tech savvy and does she's teaching a castles class this coming semester where they're doing virtual reality. She's part of a big grant program where, like how do you walk through these medieval castles and things like that and stuff. So, so she's pretty excited about this new track that, we've really discovered that, we have 2 groups of people. We have the people who know the technology, and we have the people who know the history and the heritage, and they don't necessarily speak the right language. They don't speak the same language. So trying to find somebody to be able to translate, in that middle space is something that we're hoping that option will offer. So those are kind of all of our programs in a quick purview.
I appreciate that. That sounds like a really well thought out program. I think I'm very curious to learn a little bit more about the digital heritage and the mission, the digital heritage track, and the mission or vision behind it, and sort of what you mentioned it briefly, touched on it, just merging the 2 worlds between computer science and those who understand history and heritage, and then maybe some of the output being things like virtual reality experiences or user experiences. So can you, would you feel comfortable in developing that concept a little bit more, and talking about it a little bit more, what the outputs for such a program you might think they might be?
Sure. I'm happy to do that. And then kind of, with the caveat that, it's not my baby. And so I'm not as, perhaps as fully versed as Dr. Vicki McAllister, who's been the driving force behind it. She went to she's Irish, and she was, pre-pandemic, went to a Microsoft convention in Ireland with her, history and archaeology, colleagues, and sort of one of the main topics that came up was the kind of this void really in the marketplace that that you had really high paid technology people, but they really they didn't understand anything about like what a museum should be trying to communicate or how to do that, or they knew the technology pieces, and that the heritage folks, I mean, they just didn't they didn't understand enough about the technology to even really communicate it. And so so you had institutions basically having to hire like two sets of professionals to accomplish the task, but even then, and most places can't afford to hire a separate technologist, but even then they weren't satisfied because of the lack of ability to kind of cross communicate. And so she thought that that was created an opening for a program like ours, and that we could fulfill a real need. So I think that in terms of the outputs, it's unlikely that like people will come out of the program and be able to like create apps for the and be that person, but that they would have taken enough coursework that they would be able to understand what an app needed to do, what the parameters were, and so really kind of making that that digital heritage piece that is becoming so much so much more important, kind of more feasible, and that they could if not develop it, then keep it up to date and keeping it running, and and so that as primarily heritage folks, getting that position, at a organization or entity, that they would really be able to facilitate the development of those digital outreach kinds of efforts. She's taught now a couple of times a course called Heritage Outreach, where she teaches, works with various organizations, and then has students work on projects with them that would be some sort of digital component. So building learning how to do a social media campaign, or even just some of the technological pieces of like how to make a flyer, or using Photoshop, and just things that historians typically have not been good at, but are so essential out in the workplace.
That sounds like a fantastic program. I know here at Truman, a lot of my students, I've had them developing digital exhibitions, and it necessitates them learning photography skills, WordPress, particularly because the platform that we use for our website, and then introducing even things like graphic design. And so having somebody with those skill sets is a great complement to the field. So it's exciting that you guys are developing a formal program around that. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think we'll turn now to Dr. Kelland. And Dr. Kelland, I'm hoping you can tell us, I know you're new in the position, but tell us a little bit about UMSL's program and where you might see it going in the future.
Sure, absolutely. And pardon me as I glance at notes just to confirm that I've got everything, because I'm still internalizing a lot. It's amazing how little one can learn in a year about a program. But I'm very excited to be here. And the program is like Dr. Hoffman's program, housed in history department. So it is about 25 years old. I always mean to double check the exact start date, circa 25 years old, and has always had a strong museum studies, right, component to it. And with the current faculty, I think we skew a little bit more strongly towards history. Again, it being in the history department somewhat informs that, but we do have an interdisciplinary faculty that contribute to the program. So we are in the process of revamping the curriculum, so I'm going to have to consult this, my notes here. Some of the core courses that we require of all students are things like the historian's craft. So they're getting a very broad introduction into graduate study in history, introduction to public history, a museum origins class. So they're getting, right, a sense of the history of museums.
See if she comes back here. She warned us that she was having connectivity issues today, so I'm curious how long this might last. Okay. Well, until we, she might be trying to reconnect here as well. Looks like she's back on, maybe.
I am back on. Can you hear me now?
Yes, you're good. Thank
Okay.
you.
I apologize. I found out at 10 o'clock this morning that we wouldn't have electricity today. So I'm on my phone and it's very, can you tell me where I dropped off?
You were talking about core courses and
okay.
Just listed museum origin and maybe one after that.
Thank you. Yes. So we just added also a digital public history as a central piece to our curriculum. We've taught it for a few years. My colleague, both myself, I identify as a digital public historian, and my colleague, Andrew Hurley, also teach digital public history. We also require a museums and communities practicum course, and then a couple readings in history. And beyond that, students are at liberty to choose electives. There's a number of different paths that they can go. We have a number of nonprofit administration courses outside of the department. We also rely on expertise in other fields, of course. We this year are going to have someone teaching historic site administration, so another real applied course in partnership with 4 historic sites. I teach a documentary film course, so that is also another option for students who want to focus on digital and new media. In the next year or two, we'll probably have a museum theater course being offered. So those are some of the options for elective courses. I would say that the strength of our program is really that there is a broad approach to museum studies and public history, and also that our students who come in the regular two-year admission process, we try and generally do place them in 2-year positions with graduate assistant program positions within partner organizations. So this is something that I was really drawn to working with the program because of this model. So students are getting 2 years of experience in places like Missouri History Museum, the World Chess Hall of Fame, the Blues Museum, a couple of the different arts museums. A little bit less likely they're kind of scattered across a number of years. A number of years happen in between those positions. Bell Fountain Cemetery, occasionally students are taking positions at Missouri Botanical Gardens, and the Mercantile Library on campus, as well as the Griot Museum. So, St. Louis is just a fantastic museum town. So it's really wonderful that we have opportunities to put students in those applied positions early on. And I think that really helps them with placement. Many times they end up in organizations where they worked for 2 years, but also have a lot of success going outside of the region as well. What else did I want to talk about? Yeah, so I think the other piece is just that UMSL as an institution has a long, deep commitment to engage scholarship and community and civic engagement. So it's well supported in the university. It's taken as a given within our program and in our department. And even the more traditional historians in our department have a long tradition and reputation for really wonderful engaged work. So that sort of ethos and energy and work kind of are infused throughout the entire department. Yeah. We are working on developing an undergraduate minor, which will be happening over the next few years. We're looking at a few models across the system. We're also starting to have very early conversations about the possibility of a joint MA with Mizzou that would be Archival Studies and Public History, because they of course have the library school. So that is the overview.
Okay. How big, if I may ask, how many students are in the program? Do most of them hail from the St. Louis region, or what does the application process look like for that program?
Sure. So we accept applications annually for the MA program. That deadline is February 1st. We probably average about 8 to 10 students per year per cohort, and we definitely have a strong cohort energy in the department because we only admit once a year. The graduate certificate does admit on a rolling basis, so sometimes students that are interested in just getting their feet wet or starting earlier, perhaps starting in the spring semester, sometimes opt into that and then roll into the, do an application for the full MA and then roll in the fall. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, I've asked both Dr. Sara Orel and Dr. Sara Buchanan, who we've not introduced yet, to speak a little bit about their programs. And I think, Dr. Orel, if you don't mind, I'm gonna jump over to Dr. Buchanan, because I think it segues nicely with what Dr. Lara Kelland just mentioned. You're interested in potentially developing a program with University of Missouri's Archival Studies program. And so, Sara, first of all, if you could introduce yourself to the group, but then also maybe talk a little bit about the program that you're in charge of developing.
Absolutely. Thank you, Amanda. And thank you, Sarah Wilson, for organizing today's group. This has been really exciting to hear from Stephen and from Lara. So I'm happy to pick up where Lara kindly left off. We were successful this past semester in organizing a little intercampus program to coordinate some sharing of courses that are uniquely taught at both of our institutions. So from my perspective, today I can talk about our Archival Studies program, which is within the Master of Library and Information Science, or the MLIS program here at CISLT, or what we are known as the iSchool, or the Information School. And then I can, like I said, just touch on the broader context of the Archival Studies emphasis that I direct and that I have designed courses around, and then how possibly in the future we see our 2 campuses, and then also some work over in Kansas City with the unique courses that they bring to the table too. Okay, so back to my context. I am now in my 5th year here at the University of Missouri, where I developed and currently lead the Archival Studies emphasis. So what this means is that students can take my sequence of 3 courses, starting with Archival Practice, where we get a big, broad overview of activities that archivists do every day. I try to focus on daily activities and the kind of pragmatic but also broader context of the work of everyday archivists. And students find that really exciting because they can find their place in the world. And then from there, the second course is called Appraisal and Archival Systems, and I'm currently teaching that right now. And in that course, we start to delve into technology topics. We use a software program called ArchiveSpace. Some of you might know ArchiveSpace, woohoo. And ArchiveSpace is a great educational sandbox way for students to create metadata records and explore concepts around archival description and how we describe and make our collections accessible to users that we may never encounter in person because they're online. We know that so much research nowadays starts online. And also I would say in Appraisal, we do delve into theory, and we do try to put some broader, context and people and histories and traditions, like Lara mentioned, the Museum Origins course. I would say we approach that more in appraisal than in the other courses too. We start to kind of see the bigger picture of this is what, now we've covered what we do, and this is kind of why we do it and how it's changed. And then the third course, just to wrap the loop, is called Data and Records Management. I enjoy that course. We delve into ethics a lot. We look at different data formats, and we do some writing and interesting work called storytelling, data storytelling. With a data set, students can get some work with some light coding. We don't ask too much, but we do ask a little bit of computational skills development, and I'm happy to talk more about that whenever. Okay, and then so all those three courses come together to form the Archival Studies emphasis, which is part of the Master of Library Information Science degree that students can graduate with if they're taking a full course load in 2.5 to 3 years. And then I also advise the student chapter of our Society of American Archivists, which we're so happy to see will be presenting at MAMA this month. So kudos to my students for their leadership on that. I really, really enjoy working with my students. I also know that two of my colleagues are here, Nicole Johnston and Maggie Mahan. And with them, I teach an undergraduate course in our honors college here at the university, where we introduce freshmen and above to our campus collections and issues around material culture. I love that course, and we get to experience the museums and archives around campus. So that kind of brings me back to the program that I'm most closely every day in. I'm based in the iSchool, but I also get around campus pretty often, pretty frequently. I collaborate with colleagues in the classics department on archaeological collections work, and with our campus museums, of course, and archives around collections issues and various research projects. And what did I miss?
Anyone have any questions for Dr. Buchanan? I might also ask you the same question I asked Dr. Kelland, and that was the size of your program and sort of the admission process.
Okay, yes. For the MLIS, we do admit both in the fall and in the spring. So I believe one could still get your spring application in. That deadline is still a month or two away. And we found that our classes have been really, really great this semester. Our students know that they are joining a program that has been teaching online for decades, way before I even got here. And I must say I'm continually impressed by my students and the way they're able to make this adjustment that we're all going through. I would say that my classes tend to be full and active and busy places to be. And I encourage anybody with an interest in the MLIS to talk to me.
Sounds good. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So we've heard from three people who have 2 master's programs and some sort of combination between master's and undergraduate programs too. And so I'll ask now Dr. Sara Orel from Truman State University to talk about the museum studies minor that she's developed solely for undergraduates to get them interested and engaged in the interdisciplinary aspect of museum work.
Thank you, Amanda. Unlike some of you, our program is housed in interdisciplinary studies. Although it's been taught, the courses have been taught by art faculty, art historians. It is housed in interdisciplinary studies, and the committee has representation from biology and from history, as well as Amanda and a faculty member from art. It was developed essentially through student demand, students were interested in museum studies. We've had students go on into museum studies master's programs and get positions in museums for several years since I started at Truman, which was almost 30 years ago. But we haven't had a formal museum studies program. So I started that. It was designed from the very beginning to be interdisciplinary and include, and it always attracted students from a multiple of disciplines to start out with. The program has 2 museum studies classes that are interdisciplinary, that are required. They're object and collections management and exhibitions planning and practice. And both of those are done in close collaboration with Amanda using university collections. And they're hands-on. We don't have, there is some basic theoretical stuff and history of museums, but essentially you go in from the deep end in handling of objects, dealing with conservation, preparing. One of my favorite things that I have done for the last couple of rounds of this, they're alternate years. So I've taken students over to biology and have them deal with preparing specimens of snakes and sticking formaldehyde down the snake's gullet and that sort of thing, which is a great deal of fun for me to watch student reactions to it. You have the 2 museum studies classes, each of them 3 hours, taught alternate years. Students are required to do a credit-bearing internship, which is 3 hours credit, and then 2 other courses with 2 different disciplinary prefixes. So we founded our program using the ICOM guidelines for what are proficiencies for a museum professional to have. And we have courses in business and accounting. We have courses in communications like public communications, media writing. We have photography, grant writing, design software and process, biology, zoology. We've had students who've done internships at the St. Louis Zoo, for example. We have several dedicated internships across the state for Truman students. And we've had students get internships at other locations as well. So from the very beginning, it was designed to be a hands-on class using different models of exhibits. Some of them have been designed from beginning to end within 1 semester. And then some of them have been temporary exhibits. There's currently an exhibit that just came down in the Truman State University Art Gallery on, it was called Beneath White Tents, and it was done over the course, prepared over the course of 2 years, using exhibit material from special collections, including Barnum and Bailey posters and ephemera. Then we had an exhibit that was in our permanent museum, but is designed as a temporary exhibit, dealing with the rural roots, so dealing with people in the land. And that included dealing with a variety of different things, including natural history exhibits. The program's been around for 3 years. We've been teaching museum studies for 7 years now, but the program itself has been around for only 3 years, and we're getting between 6 and 8 students a year who are going to be graduating with it. It's still picking up now, but those students are going on to museum studies programs, so you may have some applicants from our students in the future. And do you have anything to add, Amanda? Because it's really been a program that we've done in collaboration.
I think I'll just say that's been actually my favorite part of this experience is the collaboration. I still remember our very first exhibition that we did, which was a cabinet of curiosities. And that was the first time we had taught all of this. We crammed everything into one semester. And I told the students it was successful. They had a lot of fun. They were stressed out in a good way, but I think they got a lot out of it. And some of those learning objectives, learning how to work collaboratively, learning how to, do design, project management, all sorts of different theoretical and practical skills that you need to thrive in a museum environment. And it really started out because Sara is one of the most collaborative people that I've ever met in terms of being able to work as a team. And, really the topics for the exhibitions, I've done a number of collaborations with the art department. So some of our exhibits are in the art gallery, the university art gallery. Some of them are over in what is our museum space, which is a shared space between us and the admissions office. So the primary audience for that group is actually prospective students who will visit that museum. And so introducing students to all of that and having them work on a hands-on, very practical project that will be seen by the public. That's a big one for them, whether they're designing a digital exhibition or a physical exhibition. It goes up and they know it's not just their peers who are going to be seeing that. It's the prospective students, it's the parents of those prospective students, visitors to campus. And then of course the digital exhibitions have a much, wide ranging audience. But I think the collaboration aspect of that is one of the best things about this program, as well as just focusing on the interdisciplinarity concepts as well. So it's a fun project, fun program. And thank you, Sara. Does anybody have any questions for Dr. Orel? Okay. We still have about 15 minutes. And what I'm wondering is if we want the program directors to maybe talk a little bit about program advancement. You touched on a few things that you see going forward in the field, a lot of it related to digital heritage or implementing technologies. I wonder if you guys have anything you'd like to ask each other about program development and or how students can best learn about museum practice in the state. What advice, in other words, another way to rephrase this is, what advice might you give to students who are interested in museum studies programs, and how might your programs fulfill some of those needs? I'll open up to anybody.
So, well, before I forget, I just wanted, people were talking about their program tenure, and that the historic preservation program, the undergraduate program at Southeast, will be celebrating its 40th anniversary this year. So that's kind of cool that we've been around for a while. I think that one of the questions that I have and that I'm struggling with, and I know it's something that the Mama Board has focused on, and is the whole question of equity and inclusion, and how do we as both like the field needs more equity and inclusion, and what can we be doing in the field to promote that, and whether that's sort of content driven, but then as programs that prepare future practitioners, what are the things that either we are doing or could be doing or thinking about doing about trying to be more inclusive and more equitable, and I think if we're more inclusive and more equitable, then we'll have more diversity, and we'll have a diversity of diversities, and diversity is not a goal in and of itself, but it's a reflection of, I think, how inclusive we are, and so it's something I know that I've been struggling with, and I'm have a basically a white faculty, and our campus is, predominantly white, but my program is like extraordinarily white. And, and so if the people that our program is producing don't reflect the diversity of the country, then how is the field going to, engage the diversity that is our country? And I'm just wondering what other people are, if they're struggling with this, and if they have, insights or ideas or projects that have worked for them.
Yeah, thank you for those thoughts, Stephen. I absolutely, deeply, fully agree that it's something that, I feel like our field has been having a conversation about for well over a decade, and obviously a great deal more work still needs to be done. Before I left Kentucky, I was working with the Kentucky Historical Society, the University of Kentucky, and a few other smaller museums, starting to have conversations about the idea of a pipeline of students of color. And that's something that we didn't get very far, and I landed this job. And so I brought those conversations with me here, and I've started to have them in a couple really informal ways. There is a public school that is in the, I'm still learning the suburbs here, the places out in the county, the Richmond and one other school district that has it is a suburban school, but it is, I think, representative as a whole of the metro area, right, of the population. So it's a middle school that has a museum studies focus to it. So that's one place that we've started to think about. We've also had some very preliminary conversations with the St. Louis Community College, a couple different community college campuses, about that idea of starting to think about what a pipeline could possibly look like. The only other thing that I'll say is that there's also a growing community partnership with a group called Gateway GIS that is doing ArcGIS programming in St. Louis schools with an explicit racial and economic equity, right, focus. So it's in a career academy that is a St. Louis public school. So these are some of the things that we're starting to just tinker with. If there are others within MAMA that are interested in having those conversations, or something that the organization as a whole would like to start thinking about, I would be very enthusiastic to be a part of that.
And Sarah just put a comment in the chat. Sarah, I don't know if you want to talk about the diversity internship program that MAMA has.
Sure. So a few of us went to Washington, D.C. several years ago. We've been going to Advocacy Day, and one of the representatives, it was Lacey from St. Louis, asked us what we were doing to promote diversity in the field. So we came back and talked to Steve Belko, who's the head of the Missouri Humanities Council, and put together a diversity internship program where Missouri Humanities Council sponsors us to have interns in the field that specifically are tackling either topics of diversity or that the students themselves are representative of some diverse demographic. And I've found them to be quite successful. We have 2 right now out in the field. We had one this summer, which was an amazing experience for our museum. He actually interned with us at the St. Joseph Museums, and that was fantastic. We just really benefited from that project. So, I mean, I think providing paid internship opportunities really, really goes a long way to removing some barriers. So I'm a big advocate for that program. We do have one left. Yeah, thanks, Sarah. We do have one left. So for those of you who have students, for this upcoming year, we can sponsor one more diversity internship. Right now, the 2 that we have currently are in Springfield. They're working with Billy Fullinsbee, who has their museum studies program at Missouri State University. So I'm excited to see what their work does this summer. And then, Amanda, do you want me to talk about some of the other programs?
Yeah, that might be that may be a good segue, since you just mentioned Dr. Fullinsbee.
Okay.
I want to talk about a few of the others. So we do have a number of other programs in the state, and while the representatives weren't able to be here today, I do think they contacted Sara Wilson, and so Sara's going to tell us just a little bit about those programs.
So for those of you who don't know me, I think most of you do, but I'm Sara Wilson. I'm the current president of MAMA, the Missouri Association of Museums and Archives. I'm also the director of the St. Joseph Museums. And I really would like to just applaud the work that our educators are doing in the state of Missouri, because we have some really terrific museum studies, public history, historic preservation programs out there. And I know this because I run a museum and I have hired your students and they're working for me, or I'm working with your interns. And so like Stephen Hoffman, Cole Clavoon, who's our historic preservationist, I've worked with him at the St. Joseph Museums and he's fantastic. He's been with us for a long time. Sarah Buchanan, I have Emily Zeman working as my current collections manager and archives manager, and she's great. I work closely also with Alyssa Ford, who's at Northwest Missouri State University. I've hired 2 of her students, Trevor Tutt and Sarah Parks. So I have some information from Alyssa, I think I'll put in the chat, that just talks a little bit about her program. And it's kind of long, but you guys, just if you don't know her, that's her contact information and what they're doing at Northwest. They're right now currently an undergraduate only program. And it's a public history as well as museum studies program. And I've been really pleased with their students and worked with several of them on internship projects as well as hired them. And then I did mention Billy Fullinsbee down at Springfield, and they're doing some great work. We had our conference down in Springfield and some of their students presented. They're getting hands-on experience, kind of a history about me. My degree's in anthropology. I wrote my master's thesis on how museum professionals deal with ideological change and look at integrating theory and practice within the museum field. And so that's kind of my big push, is when I think about museum education, how to take what we're learning in the classroom and have that hands-on application. And I believe so strongly, like the partnership that museums can have with universities, training students and preparing them for the field, and the really unique role of interns to be a university student and also working within the museum gives them this very neat place of being able to do some really potent research projects and then get hands-on application. And so I love that nexus. It's particularly powerful and I think it's great. So, and then the last person that I think is doing some amazing things is Dr. Amber Clifford Napoleon at Warrensburg, the University of Central Missouri. Amber is also an anthropologist and she runs the McClure Archives and museum program there. And she has, she's also a good resource that's doing amazing things. And I think, and maybe someone else can help me, UMKC has also a public history digital humanities program. Dr. Kelland, do you know, or it looks like you're...
Yes, they have I believe they have, we're collaborating with them on the undergrad minor. So they definitely are teaching a class or 2 at the undergrad level, and they do have a master's, but that's about all I can say about it.
I've worked with some of their students and so, I think depending on the students who are in the program, they may or may be doing some more or less museum studies or public history. I haven't heard a lot from them lately, but I think that they could be well engaged. So that's all I had, but I wanted to share some other people that are doing some great things as well as you guys. And hopefully this, it's a strong collective of people thinking about museums and public history and historic preservation in Missouri, and that's great.
Thank you, Sara. I might ask all of our panelists, everyone who has spoken today, to just give one bit of advice for a student or someone who is interested in going into the museum profession. What would be your one bit of advice to them?
I've been jumping in first all along, so I'll just follow suit. I think my one piece of advice would be to volunteer at different places and kind of get a sense and a taste of what the field is like. And you know, if you volunteered in archives, you're going to know what they do and whether that's for you or not. And you know, and the same thing, historic sites and museums, and just that the more practical experience you have, I think the more you'll get out of a formal study of you know, in the field. But also, you know, it'll help you choose your direction, and will also help you with contacts. So that would be my one piece of advice, would be to go out and put yourself out there and volunteer.
I wholeheartedly second that. Thank you. So next, Dr. Kelly.
I'll stick with the traditional order too. I would second the getting practical experience and getting your feet wet, but I would also say that talking to as many people as possible. I always tell students this in any kind of career advice perspective. I'll tell you everything I know, here's my perspective on it, but be sure to talk to lots of other people. And I think one of the beauties of our fields is that they are so permeable, and there's a lot of give and take between different museums and cultural heritage professions. But you'll get very different takes from talking to different professionals. And I think every time you talk to another, as a student, as an emerging professional, every time you talk to another more established professional, your worldview shifts a little bit, and it's richer for it.
I'm going to sound very much like a Truman person, which is that I think the other two have great suggestions, but the suggestion that I would have is that they should be able to write and communicate, and write as much as possible, take grant writing classes, take nonfiction, creative nonfiction courses, get used to working with words, because that's the way that they'll be communicating through time. And the better off you are with that, the better you are with that, the better off you're going to be in getting a job.
I would advise a student that there is a lot of opportunity to be creative, and that there's no really one right way to do things in terms of finding your way through the profession. I encounter students who often are very new to archives, but who I sometimes have to show through the discussions that we have in class and through outside conversations, that there's a place for whatever interests and opportunities and background that they bring, because our profession does need all of that interesting diversity that Stephen was talking about. And there's a lot of archives, and there are a lot of museums out there. Sara was just mentioning there's over 600 in our state alone, and it's amazing. And then you start looking around our state, and the opportunities are really endless. So I find that my students kind of have to be encouraged that it's okay to kind of not have a single set of experiences that sometimes they think is necessary, but that there's a lot of opportunity to be creative and to find what really speaks to themselves as an emerging new professional. And also to, of course, gain experience, and of course, as you're doing that experience, to be responsible with your time, and to, it's related to diversity, I think, in that part of taking on the opportunities that work for you at the time is to also understand the scope and boundaries of projects, as they can stretch on. And sometimes I have to tell students, for a practicum or for a class assignment, for example, to set boundaries for their own self-care.
Excellent advice from all of you. Sara, you had spoken a few things too as a director of the St. Joseph Museums. Would you like to provide some advice from the practitioner side?
Sure. Well, I think three things maybe that come to my head. The first is I always kind of look first to emerging professionals when I'm making hiring decisions. And so when I have students that are coming and doing internships with me, they're really essentially applying for a job. And so if they do a great job for me, if I have a position open up, I'm going to contact them first, because I know that's the kind of person that I'm going to want to hire. They have the skill sets and the training that I need. So that's the first thing, is those internship opportunities are so, so important. Or even just if you're doing a class project and you're working with the museum, that's a great way to apply for jobs and build your future. The second thing that I would say is, right now during the pandemic, we have all of these amazing online opportunities for learning. And it's kind of been a disappointment to me that we haven't seen more museum studies students online in these classes. And I know that they're back to school at the university, but I would think that our museum studies students that are out there should be taking advantage of this particular moment where we have all these great free or very reasonable educational opportunities to meet with professionals in the field. I've enjoyed it. I've learned and had the opportunity to grow and make connections in new ways. And then the last thing I would say is definitely find your passion and do what you were made to do as a human being. That's going to take you far, but then learn the business side of museums as well. Because if you really want to get paid to do that passion or have the security to do that passion, you also have to know how to write grants, fundraise, look at a budget. And so don't forget that those are things that are really important to empower you to be able to do the work that you want to do.
Well, thank you. I feel very inspired right now from all of you for all the advice that you've given. And I really hope, we had a number of people registered for this event, and I don't think everybody came that was registered, but this has been recorded and will be available for later use. And so I'd encourage you to share it with your students. I intend to share it with mine for those who are interested in the field, just because I really think this provided some great context, overview of the museums and what to look for in a profession. So I'd like to thank each of our panelists. I really appreciate it. I know this is appreciate you coming and participating. I know this is a very busy time for everybody. So thank you again for being willing to give up your time and to spend some time talking about your programs and your interests today. I'd also like to remind everybody that the upcoming annual conference for the Missouri Association for Museums and Archives is very soon. We are slated to have our conference, which will be a virtual conference, October 21st through the 24th. It's a very reasonably priced conference, and I believe Sarah, or someone has just put the link in the chat, so feel free to go to that website and register. We would love to see you there. That being said, hope everybody has a great day, and thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda.
Thanks, Amanda. Thank you, everyone.